Okay, thank you very much. Somebody's recording. I appreciate this. It's really for the students who, I think there's at least 4 students who are not going to be able to be here today, either because of load shedding or work commitments and also illness. So I've received those apologies. I assume you can hear me. If you can't hear me, if there's anything else, you just raise your hand, you butt in, and make a noise of any sort. Today, before we look at today's material, I want to talk about your test that's coming up on Saturday. I want you've got a 24-hour period to compile your, let's call it essay or essays, more than one. And what I want you to do, of course, I want you to blow me away, give me really good work. And for you to do that, I'm just going to tell you what it is that I would want from you, how I want you to write your essays, how I want you to structure it. What you would have seen in some of the model answers that you've received over the past few weeks to some of the work, that very often it isn't so much that there's something mind-blowing in the essay or something that you didn't know. But usually the essay is a model essay because of the way it is written, the way it is structured. And so I want to really address you on that. And of course, you're welcome to raise any questions as I go along. Generally, when it comes to essay and essay writing, an examiner, somebody who marks your essay, can very quickly see how well you have grasped the material, how well you understand it. And sometimes people are not doing themselves justice. They may understand it better than they're able to put it down on paper. And so it's important for you to put it down on paper in a way that impresses the person who's reading it. And I'm going to give you some guidelines according to that. And let's assume you're writing an essay. I don't know what length these essays are going to be, but let's say it's an essay of, say, 3,000 words. In exam setting, I suppose most of you have done, all of you have done written exams. Some of the essays may be 5, 6, 7 pages long, depending, of course, on the handwriting. But the structure, what I want you to do is the following. I mean, you're all familiar with an introductory paragraph, an introductory paragraph. And that is usually some general statement, some general introduction to the topic. It is that first paragraph that comes after the introduction that is the most important. Because in that first paragraph, sorry, there's a program that's wanting to install on my computer. That first paragraph is the one that, well, it's the most important for your own benefit, and it's the most important one for the examiner. Firstly, why is it the most important one for the examiner? Well, in that first paragraph, and again, that's the paragraph following the introduction, I call it the first paragraph, because in that first paragraph, you give a very concise answer to the question that is being posed. And if you're not writing for exams, it is still your most important paragraph because you give, in a very concise way, you are giving an indication what what it is that you're writing about. What is the argument that you're making? And let's call it the argument. And I just got to emphasize that, because what I will be looking for is an argument. And I say argument as opposed to a list of things, because one may be inclined to try and put down everything you know about a certain topic. And as you put down everything you know about a certain topic, well, it just becomes a list of things. And of course, the examiner is going to read that and say, well, of that which has been put down, what is relevant to the question? You know, you may have done, you may know a lot about Adam Smith, for instance. Well, we're not going to be, you know, you won't be tested on Adam Smith in this tests. But let's take the example of Adam Smith. You may know a lot about Adam Smith and you're writing it all down. But that's, you know, I mean, you know, that it can be 20 pages long, 30 pages long, depending on how well how much you studied. But what the examiner is looking for is, are you able, from given the knowledge you have on Smith or any other topic, are you able to put it together in a way that's coherent, that's going to answer a question, that's making an argument? So the emphasis is on making an argument as opposed to just putting down lists. And so it is usually in that very first paragraph where I can discern whether you're able to put down a good argument. It's in that first paragraph. Look at the first paragraph as if it were like a roadmap for the reader. If you are making an argument, then the reader would like to know your argument and what argument you're making from the outset. He doesn't want to find out as he goes along. And that's why I call it a roadmap, because when you're going to some destination, well, these days, you know, you just put it on a GPS and you follow wherever the road takes you. And the GPS knows which route it's taking you on, but you yourself may not know which route it is taking. So, but if you had to explain to somebody what route you're taking, you'd have to know more than just what you see on the GPS. And so when I get an essay, I don't want to be taken along a GPS ride where I find out as I go along what it is that you're saying. No, I want you to tell me from the outset where you're taking me and how you're taking me. Are you taking me to Cape Town via Bloemfontein, or are you taking me to Cape Town via Kimberley? Or are you taking me to Cape Town via OR Tambo International Airport? So you've got to give me a roadmap at the beginning. And that you do in that very first paragraph. So that first paragraph is like a summary of your argument. Sorry, I've got lots of things that are popping up on this computer wanting to install this and that. So that first paragraph is crucial because it's going to be like a roadmap for your reader. But I also said that it's going to be a very important paragraph for yourself, because it's really, I mean, what you will do as an exercise, maybe for the tests, and maybe you've done that before, but it's always a good exercise to try and condense your argument in 3 or 4 sentences into one paragraph. Because if you understand your material well enough, you will succeed at that. You're going to be able to really crystallize it down to the most crucial 3 or 4 points. And your argument hangs on those 3 or 4 points. Now, if you don't know the material well enough, you're not going to be able to produce a short paragraph of 3 or 4 sentences that really encapsulate the entire argument. And so it's a good exercise for you to really get to grips with that first argument, that first paragraph, because depending on how well you know the material, depending on how well you have been able to crystallize what you are going to say in your essay, you're going to struggle to put down that first paragraph. And what you will find is that it's a paragraph that you're not necessarily writing at the beginning. It may follow straight after the introductory paragraph, but actually you may write it much later, because as you are answering your essay, you know, material is popping up and you're still formulating ideas, and you may not be able to develop your first paragraph right at the beginning. It may come only at the end. Just one moment. So if I'm going to write this on a whiteboard, I mean, it would be useful to have a whiteboard at the, or blackboards in class at the moment. So, okay, so you start with your introductory paragraph. Then your first paragraph, that's the one I'm saying is so important. Can you read this the way it ought to be read, or does it show up as mirror-sided?
It's the right way around.
It's the right way around. Okay, for me, it shows the wrong way around. So that first paragraph, really give it time. You know, you're not working under exam conditions. You're not sitting there having to answer 3 or 4 essays, 3 or 4 questions in a period of 2 or 3 hours. No, you've got 24 hours. So take your time on that first paragraph, because that first paragraph is going to be the roadmap for the marker. And it's also that first paragraph that, you know, is making the first impressions, where the marker is going to say, okay, I know what the argument is. That argument makes sense from the beginning. This is great. That's telling me which direction the essay is going. And then what follows, hopefully, we'll talk to that first paragraph, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So your first paragraph is crucial. In fact, what that first paragraph, so we got to talk about that first paragraph. You don't want more than 3 or 4 sentences. Okay, just 3 or 4 sentences. But everything of importance has to be in that first paragraph, in those 3 or 4 sentences. In a sense, it's a bit like an abstract, but usually abstracts tend to be much longer. I've seen abstracts that are like half a page long. I don't want it like that. But it is a type of abstract where you condense your argument. Now, what you will find is that when you get to the conclusion, when you're summarizing it, well, your summary is going to be very similar to your first paragraph. And so often it is the case that you only are able to write your first paragraph once you're able to write your summary, your concluding paragraph. What you will also find, it is a good exercise for you, because it's difficult to condense an argument onto 3 or 4 into one paragraph, or just 3 or 4 sentences. It's not easy, and you know, that's why I've been doing those exercises with you, where, you know, I've asked you to write essays of 300 words, or essays of 400 words, and then essays of 800 words, What I would really want you to do is write essays of 100 words or 200 words, because in those essays of 100 words, you now really have to condense long arguments into the most essential and most important aspects of what you will be writing about. And so it's easy to make essays long, because you just add on, you know, a little bit more, you add on. But it's difficult to write short, because then you've got to discriminate between what is really important and what is not so important. And usually your ability to discriminate and to discriminate properly between what is important and what is not important, that ability tells the examiner how well you understand the material. All right, so your first paragraph is crucial, and let me just elaborate on that first paragraph as follows. Let's say it's got, four sentences. Sentence A, B, C, and D. And that's already too much. It might only A, B, and C. But let's say you've got your first paragraph consists of those sentences A, B, C, and D. Now, the rest of your essay will now talk to that first paragraph. It will talk to those first sentences, that sentence A, B, C, and D. And obviously, you know, I'm just testing here, of those sentences A, B, and C, or A, B, C, and D, which is likely to be the most important sentence? Liesl.
The first sentence?
There you go. As simple as that, you know, and you know, this may be, in a sense, when you look at it, it may be obvious, but if you don't articulate, if you don't consider it, you may miss that important point. A general rule for your essay: your first sentence is the most important sentence of all. And I've been communicating with some students who were wondering, you know, how can they improve their marks, their essay writing marks? How can they improve their essay writing skills? And, you know, those students I've been talking to, what I want them to do is to be able to say what they want to say in one sentence. I mean, it reminds you of the notion of a hypothesis. You know, a hypothesis for your honors or for your master's essay or dissertation. Your hypothesis is there to set the scene for the rest of the dissertation. I don't like the notion of hypotheses per se, because a hypothesis has got the implications that you know, it is something that has to be tested. You're making like one of many possible hypotheses, and then you got to test whether that hypothesis in fact corresponds to the data. Well, we're not doing that sort of work, but you get the idea of the similarity. If anybody comes to you and says, well, what is your argument on A, B, and C? Or what is your argument on that topic? And you don't have much time. Let us say somebody asks you, why is Adam Smith important in economics? And he doesn't want to know much, doesn't care about economics. And now you've got to tell him something about Adam Smith. And then, well, you can start off telling him, well, he was born in, when was he born? 1728 or somewhere there. Well, that's not important, is it? And if you talk about Adam Smith, he talked about supply and demand, and he talked about institutions, all of that is relevant, but it's not what's going to tell him what is really important about Adam Smith. So rather you would have to say, well, Adam Smith to us is important because he popularized, if he hadn't come up with that notion, at least he popularized the idea of the invisible hand. And so now you're telling somebody immediately why he's important, and whatever you say about that will now have to be in relation to that statement and elaboration on that invisible hand. You would then add additional material that he wrote other important books such as the Wealth of Nations or the Theory of Moral Sentiments, but you gotta have the most important statement right at the beginning, and all the other statements will be an elaboration on that. And in the same way, your first paragraph is the most important, and everything is an elaboration on that. And the first sentence in your first paragraph is the most important because the remaining 2 or 3 sentences in your first paragraph will talk to that first sentence one way or another. So let me get back to my little table here, and literally it's a table, it's like a whiteboard. It may well, so that is your most important. That's your most important. And so if you want to know how well have you understood what you're writing, I mean, as you're writing your essay, you can test how well you have understood what you're writing if you're able to condense what you're writing into that first sentence, into the most important sentence. If you've written your essay and it's 5-6 pages long, and now you want to see, okay, how do I condense that into one sentence, and you're not able to do, then what you will find is that most of your essays just are long. What's the expression? Does one use the expression of waffling? Is that the word? Or is there a better word for it? You're just waffling, waffling. Because if you're doing more than waffling, you'll be able to really know which of those statements, which of the things that you've said is the most important. You get what I'm saying here? And then if it's your most important, then your other sentences, B, C, and D, are really an elaboration of that first sentence. Can you see the sequence there? Okay. Sentence B may well talk to A. Sentence C may talk to A. Sentence D is an elaboration of that sentence A. Doesn't necessarily have to be, I mean, I'm not going to give you a strict rule here. It may well be that sentence B introduces a second topic, and then C talks on that on that second topic, and D will talk to the sentence C. But important is that the most important material, one way or another, is there in the first paragraph. And it's the most important sentence for the paragraph for the examiner, because it's telling the examiner what's coming. It's the most important for you because it tests whether you're able to condense your argument in a way that makes sense in very little time, very little space. Okay, are you okay with that? Then, once you've got that first paragraph, and we've said the first paragraph consists of sentence A, B, C, and D, your second paragraph Okay, you've already talked about the most important things. You've already given me a summary of your argument in that first paragraph. Given that you've already given me a summary of your argument, don't give me another summary. Now you've got to elaborate on that summary. And so your second paragraph will have to continue what you were saying in your first paragraph. And ideally, your second paragraph will now elaborate on your first sentence. And it may be that you need more than one paragraph to do that. Your third paragraph may also be an elaboration on that first paragraph. Although it might also be an elaboration on your second paragraph. But you know what? Can you see what it does? It means it disciplines you. It disciplines you to stick to an argument, to work to an argument, to work to a plan. It doesn't allow you to bring in irrelevant material, because your third paragraph, by definition or by structure in this case, it's relevant because it's talking to your first sentence in the first paragraph. Or it may be talking to the second paragraph. Either way, the second paragraph talks to what? To the first sentence in the first paragraph. And so it's relevant. And so you continue. Your fourth paragraph is now possibly, I mean, if you get my drift, the fourth paragraph might now be addressing what you have said in sentence B of your first paragraph. And that's why I say that your first sentence in the first paragraph is the most important, because everything else that comes in B, C, and D, and then second, third, and fourth paragraph, in a sense, it is all linked to the first sentence of the first paragraph. And so it carries on with the fifth paragraph. The fifth paragraph might relate to the fourth paragraph, or it might relate to another point, sentence B in the first paragraph. But you can see the paragraphs that follow the first paragraph are always an elaboration on the first paragraph. And it's in that sense that it is a roadmap for the reader. It's in that sense that it disciplines you to work to a plan. It disciplines you to work on an argument. It disciplines you not to give me a list of things. All right? I mean, I remember some time ago, my wife did some postgraduate studies in education, and you know, she struggled with the argument. I didn't understand the topic, but I told her, well, she gave it to me to read, and I read it, and I said, it's like a shopping list. It's a shopping list. It's all there. It's all there. I don't know what you're saying, everything and nothing. And she took a long time to condense it into one paragraph and one most important sentence. At some point, after a lot of hard work, rereading what she had already read before, she was able to identify a most important sentence. Well, not necessarily in the literature, but she was able to reduce what she was saying to one sentence. And after she did that, everything just fell into place. And I mean, the proof of the pudding was that she got a fabulous mark for it. But it's, again, maybe her argument was partially already there, but she wasn't presenting it well. But in that particular case, or more often than not, you will find your argument isn't really there, because you're only able to write that first paragraph, that most important sentence, once you've really come to grips with it. And it's really a means to test how well you've come to grips with the material. So let me now talk about, having talked about that second paragraph, okay, and the other paragraphs. Now that second paragraph is going to have a most important sentence, isn't it? And that most important sentence will be the first one. Because now in that first sentence of that second paragraph, you're telling the reader what this paragraph is going to be about. So just as your first paragraph tells the reader what the essay and what your argument is about, so your first sentence in the second paragraph tells the reader what this paragraph is going to be about and what argument is contained in this second paragraph. And your second sentence, okay, and I call the second sentence Roman 2. Your second sentence will be an elaboration, an addition to the first sentence in that second paragraph. If it is not an elaboration on that first sentence in that paragraph, then it shouldn't be there because it's going to disrupt your logic. Okay, you're wanting to build a logical argument and you want to keep the logic flowing. So you want to group relevant material in that second paragraph, sentence 1, sentence 2, sentence 3, maybe sentence 4 in that paragraph. But all of those sentences will relate to that first one. And so you're building up the logic of it and you're keeping relevant material, and whatever you're writing is relevant to your argument. You're not just giving me points that are of interest. I don't want to know points that are of interest because you know that the art of writing essay is not going to be in having that list of points that are important or of interest. The quality of the argument is how well are you able to make an argument, and how well you're going to be able to make an argument depends on how well you've structured it. And I'm telling you here how to structure it. And so when you get to your third paragraph, the third paragraph, one way or another, relates to the first paragraph, either through paragraph 2 or to something else that you've already addressed in the first paragraph. And again, the most important sentence of the third paragraph is what? It's your first sentence, because it's telling the reader what that paragraph is going to be about. And then, okay, so that's sentence 3i. And then your last sentence of the paragraph, I mean, that's less important, but your last sentence of any paragraph may build a bridge to the paragraph that follows. So if we've got paragraph 2, sentence 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you may have a sentence 5 that is like a bridge, a liaison, a transition to that which is going to follow in your third paragraph. Do you get the idea there? Do you have any questions regarding that? Do you want me to, shall we do that on a particular example that you can think of? Okay, what I want to do, Greg, I just want to get some, I've got a dry throat. Let me just get a glass of water. Give me a moment. In the meantime, if you want to, you can think of a topic that we can use and just look at this structure in some more detail if you believe you would like more detail on it. But give me a few moments. So the difference between a first-class essay and a second, third, or just a pass essay, often it's not what material is there, what material is in the body of the essay, but very often it is how that material is presented, because the degree to which you understand the material, the topic, the question, will be reflected in the way you put it together. And so if you don't really understand a topic well or a subject well, especially on a take-home exam, you may have the material, you put the material there because you think it's important. You don't really know how important and how it fits in with the rest, if it does fit in with the rest at all, but you've got it there anyway. And so you put it in and it's there. And so many of the topics that may be in your essay are there, and yet you're only getting 60 or 50, and somebody else has got the same material or not much more than what you've got in terms of points, but gets a first class. And the difference is the first class essay will show that the person has understood the material, the topic extremely well, so well that he can give a logical answer, a logical argument where things hang together in a logical manner, in the manner I've described now, with the most important point right at the beginning. You don't look at this like you got to reach a climax. You build up from a less important to the crescendo, a musical crescendo or something. Don't work up to a climax. No, it's the other way around. Often students think they got to work towards the most important point. You don't work towards the most important point. You give the most important point at the beginning. And then everything that you're writing relates to that most important point. And then by definition, you've got a logical argument. But if you don't understand the material well enough, you don't know what's the most important point. So you're just going to have, so it's going to be up in the air. Does that make sense? You got any questions regarding that? You want to an example or anything? Now's your time, and otherwise we'll start on Ricardo.
An example could be nice. Maybe we just continue with the Adam Smith one you started on.
Okay, Adam Smith.
Dense, yeah.
Okay, so let's see what we can do with Adam Smith. So I'm saying, let's assume, what question would they be? I mean, very often, yeah, the difficult thing about studies is to know what questions are relevant, what questions are important. So what question would you think would be an interesting, important question regarding Adam Smith?
Can I interject?
Sure, please. Anybody, anytime, always.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I guess maybe this does relate to what Dumelo proposes when we continue with Adam Smith. So the example that I think we can look at is defining the concept of liberty from an Aristotelian perspective in relation to the four causes. So it's define liberty in relation to the four causes.
Okay, that's now relating to Adam Smith.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's see what we can do. So we got a question on Adam Smith. And it's dealing with, can you see me? Somehow I can't see myself. Oh, what's happened?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay. All right. So we got a question on Adam Smith, liberty, and the four causes. Basically, what for Adam Smith is the meaning of liberty, and explain that meaning in terms of the four causes. And so when we talk about liberty and the four liberty, we gotta get to this immediately, if we can, to a most important sentence. And that's now telling us why Adam Smith is so important. And of course, what we would be saying is something to the effect that Adam Smith regarded the freedom of economic agents or actors or economic entities, not that he was using that expression, their freedom to be important, and this is really what makes that answer important, because we've been given half of the answer simply by the question, isn't it? You immediately know what you're going to write about in your first paragraph, in your first sentence. You got to write about liberty or something about liberty, because that's what the question is about. But the importance for Adam Smith is that liberty is important because it leads to economic wealth. And so we relate it immediately to his most important work, the theory of the nature and causes of wealth. So your first sentence will be that for Adam Smith, liberty is crucial because if properly channeled, it can lead to economic wealth. Now, what you will see, I said properly channeled, because I'm alerting the reader at this point that it can also be incorrectly channeled. And it's incorrectly channeled if people are able to sort of corner a market, monopolize, then they're up using the liberty, okay? So it's alerting, that properly channeled may look like something unimportant, but it's alerting the reader that there's going to be something very important. And so we addressed in that first sentence that I've just spoken now, I'm not writing it out, we've addressed the liberty aspect and Adam Smith, and to his most important point, namely the wealth of a nation. And now we would have to relate it to the second part of the question, which has to be with the 4 causes. And the 4 causes, you don't list the 4 causes now, but you would have to say which of the 4 causes is the most important of the 4 causes. And the most important of the 4 causes will always be the formal cause, okay? Because the formal cause will tell us what is the nature of the thing. And so you would write something to the effect that the formal cause of, and here we talk about economic wealth and liberty. What is wealth? What is the formal cause of wealth? What is wealth? And here it is important now, I mean, you're not going to mention that in that paragraph, but I take you back to the mercantilists, I take you back to the physiocrats. Mercantilists thought it's bullion, and the physiocrats thought that all wealth comes from agriculture. What, according to Adam Smith, would be the formal cause? What is the nature of wealth? If you were to guess, or I mean, we're beyond guessing at this point.
Production.
It's certainly part of it, and that's why we are asking the question in terms of 4 causes, because there are so many different answers, okay? And certainly production will feed into one of the 4 causes, but for Adam Smith, more important than production and ability to produce is actually the ability to consume, the ability to enjoy. Wealth lies not so much in what you are producing, because you can produce, you can produce any amount of irrelevant things, but you can produce that which is wanted. And that's why it will relate again to liberty, because it's got to be wanted by somebody. You got to be wanted by somebody who wants to choose to consume it. So your formal cause most likely lies in the ability to enjoy the benefits of production, okay, to consume, to wealth doesn't lie in the money that you have, because if you can't buy anything with the money, as was the case in Spain, in many time after they got all the bullion from Latin America, wealth lies not in the bullion, but in whether you've got products there that can actually be bought. And whether you've got products that are there that can actually be bought depends on the other 3 causes. And that's where, and into the other 3 causes will flow things like production. And so, and whether, okay, so production, if you like, is of course that which is, that would now be the material cause, are the things that have been produced for the enjoyment of the goods that have been produced. And then the efficient cause will relate it to liberty, where people, okay, the efficient cause, some agent, somebody who makes decisions, and their liberty comes in. Liberty in the sense of the producers having the ability, having the opportunity to produce the things. Okay, they will be producing the things. We could also say the consumer have the ability to choose them, but we're probably going to put that into the final, into the final cause rather than material cause. And here, when we talk about the material cause, it now relates back to what I was saying, if properly channeled, because you can have goods which are being produced in the absence of proper liberty, because you have a monopolized market, you have a state monopoly or other restrictions, so they counter liberty. But you can't just let people do whatever they want to do. You need to be able to create the institutional environment for them to produce, okay, in terms of the material cause, actually produce in a manner that will be in the absence of monopolization or other predatory activities. So, I mean, you would have, so on the basis of that, what I'm saying in terms of the first paragraph, your first paragraph will talk about liberty leads to economic wealth, addressing the four causes. Most important, wealth is to be understood of what you're able to consume. And then you may relate that, if you want to the final cause, because that will lead to a higher level of standard of living for members of that society. And then you get to your second, so that's your first paragraph. Now you've got to talk about your second paragraph. You now have to talk about what you've got in your first paragraph, in your first sentence of the first paragraph. In other words, economic wealth and liberty. So you talk about economic wealth. What does Adam Smith understand as economic wealth? And here you can separate Adam Smith in the third paragraph, let us say, from the physiocrats and from the mercantilists. So quickly saying something about the physiocrats and the mercantilists, maybe your paragraph 3 and 4. And then you elaborate more on what he understands, not only by economic wealth of nations, but what he says about liberty, and how his notion of liberty now is important in contrast to the mercantilists, which was a highly regulated type of economic environment. And you bring in in one of those paragraphs the idea of the four causes. Naturally, you can see it's a complicated question because it wants you to talk about liberty, Adam Smith, and the four causes. So you've got to be able to say something very briefly about four causes, just list the four causes somewhere in those early paragraphs, and then the later paragraphs relate to the four causes that you have listed, giving some more detail on those. That's a mouthful, isn't it? But you can see that's a sort of material that would really force you to bring together different aspects of the syllabus, and that you can only write about if you've got a good understanding what Adam Smith says, what is understood by the four causes, and how on earth are you going to relate all of that to liberty, and why that leads to a growing economy. Mpumelelo, does that more or less give you a quick answer to that big question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, so you've got the most important parts there. And whatever follows is just going to add additional material, but it will be coherent if it relates to what you have said in that very first paragraph. Other questions? Anything else you want along those lines? All right, then I look forward to your essays which I'll get on Sunday, right? So we are still in classical economics. I've just got to rewrite this. We're looking at the work of David Ricardo. And David Ricardo lived from, I think was born 1772. He died at the age of 51. So that was like 1823. Why is he important to economic thought? Well, that, of course, is what we have to address here. David Ricardo is very important to economic thought because, one, he elaborated on that question of liberty, freedom, if you like, which we already encountered earlier in Adam Smith and the Physiocrats. But in particular, he's important for his contribution to international trade with his theory of comparative what? Anybody got an idea?
Advantage.
His theory of comparative advantage. I mean, if you do international trade today, 200 years later, it is really mostly a development on the theory of comparative advantage. But it's not only the theory of comparative advantage. We've also got David Ricardo introducing the idea of the margin, okay, which pops up again with the marginalist analysis, although in a different format, but it's there. Many would say that, well, he's also important because of the labor theory of value. All right, so certainly Karl Marx had a great interest in him. Liberal economists have a great interest in him because of his theory of comparative advantage. He is important. Labor theory of value, the margin. Well, as we go along, we'll find many more reasons why he is so important to economic theory. He is important to us for what he says about the distribution theory, okay, economic theory of distribution of income. And as we go along, more and more will pop up. So he's, in a sense, you know, we talk about Adam Smith as the father of economics, but much more influential, much more lasting in terms of how we do economics today has been the influence of David Ricardo, to the point that we talk about this thing here, the Ricardian vice. Okay, a vice is never a good thing, right? Okay. although these days vice and virtue, as we saw in the work of de Mandeville, these are just terms that we don't attach too much importance to. And so certainly today we would see the Ricardian vice to actually be a virtue. But at the time of early economics, it wasn't regarded as a vice. Sorry, it wasn't regarded as a virtue. It was considered a vice. So what is it? That is the Ricardian vice. The Ricardian vice is, well, that's what we do in economics today. We make some very simplified assumptions. And, we talk about things that, that we do as individuals or that happen in the economy in a very attenuated fashion. We make these very simplified assumptions, and on the basis of these simplified assumptions, which are not at all, if you like, realistic sometimes, and may not correspond to what we assume or what we say is the reality, but on the basis of those very simplified assumptions, we come to some very important policy conclusions, as we'll see as we look at his models, if you like. In a sense, certainly the Ricardian vice would already be in the work of, okay, who? I mean, if we're talking about the Ricardian vice being that of making very simplifying assumptions, very thin assumptions, building a big policy conclusion on some very simplified assumptions, we would certainly think of the work of which economists to be already examples of that Ricardian vice? In which school of thought have we come across some very simplified and possibly unrealistic assumptions, but with important conclusions? Yes, who wants to say there? Mpumelelo.
Jeremy Bentham in his work on happiness, or the
well,
principle of happiness.
Certainly Jeremy Bentham would fit into that, because Jeremy Bentham, what does he say about happiness?
That happiness is the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain.
That is an enormous thing, 90% of economic analysis and theory is really based on that assumption. Well, some might be saying it's not an assumption. Bentham would be saying this is not an assumption. That is really what is the case, but we haven't come to that yet, okay? So we haven't talked about Bentham yet, so let's rather go back in time to what we've already done in class.
How about physiocrats?
The physiocrats, okay? The physiocrats dividing society into three classes and saying that the only wealth and only surplus value is created in agriculture. And then we have simple assumptions like, okay, it's producing in the agricultural sector, we got a rate of return of 100%. And we allocate the expenditure 50 to agriculture, 50% to the output of artisans. And then you think, oh, well, these are all innocuous and assumptions. If you want to do that, please go ahead. But yeah, at the end of it, wow, you come up with important policy conclusions like the unique or the single tax, and various statements about trying to favor the agricultural sector. So thank you very much. So we've got two examples of simplifying assumptions. Now, David Ricardo, we think of you'll see in a moment why it really became important with the work of David Ricardo, because if you like, you can look at the work of the physiocrats as a precursor to Adam Smith, but it was quickly forgotten about once we had Adam Smith on the scene. But when we get to the work of David Ricardo, we haven't forgotten about it yet. We're still dealing with it. We're still living it. We're still together, of course, with also the assumptions that we find with the utilitarians, Bentham and the like, we're still living it. We're still living those assumptions of Ricardo and Bentham and his followers. So, well, and of course, once we've got simplifying assumptions, you can well guess that we're going to be having a model, okay? And maybe I should just put that in there. Certainly, we put David Ricardo to be part of the classical economists. He's, you know, political economy is the expression, the term that became important. And, you know, that the word, the expression economics wasn't really used. It was still seen more as political economy, or talked about as political economy. And even though we put David Ricardo as economists, as historians of economic thought, we put David Ricardo alongside Adam Smith, Jean-Baptiste Say, and John Stuart Mill. We'll get to that later in the classical school. But there are some philosophers who like to look at Ricardo as different from Adam Smith, really introducing something more modern than Adam Smith. And you know, that those are philosophers. You know, the philosopher Foucault sees that, well, Ricardo really belongs to a newer generation than Adam Smith, because of that type of, well, because of he sees the, you know, the beginnings of the labor theory of value, and an idea called finitude, you know, that everything sort of operates towards a endpoint. I'm not going to engage too much with that, except, yeah, the finitude, that endpoint is really important in his analysis. And what has happened, and certainly where that analysis to a degree may be important of the philosophers, is that there was a radical change in mindset from the time of Adam Smith to David Ricardo. With Adam Smith, at the time of Adam Smith, the late 1700s, in British economic circles, in Parliament, a lot of enthusiasm. But then come 1800, and that's the sort of the time period where Foucault sees a change, a shift. From 1800, a type of pessimism sets in. But that pessimism is, yes, it is related to the work of David Ricardo, as we see in a moment. It is also related to the work that we had looked at right at the beginning. Which theorist did we look at right at the beginning of our course? Who's also a classical economist. When you think about pessimism, you think about, we'll talk about Ricardo in a moment, but you also think about the contemporary of Ricardo, a friend of Ricardo, although they disagreed on just about everything. And well, modern economics has gone along with David Ricardo more than his friends. But his friend certainly had some very pessimistic ideas. And who was that friend?
Thomas Malthus.
Thomas Malthus, thank you very much. The population principle, remember Thomas Malthus said there's no point for economic growth because of what the Malthusian principle, population can grow so quickly that whatever gains you make in terms of living standards and being able to feed larger populations will be undone very quickly by the growth of by the growth in population. So we don't need to, but we're not, we've already dealt with Thomas Malthus, but certainly that period, 1800, will now be a period of a loss of that enthusiasm and optimism that is associated with the work of Adam Smith and the early or the late 1700s. And it's really, when it comes to David Ricardo, it's related something called the stationary state. Okay, where state doesn't mean to a, political entity like the South African state. No, state, it's a condition that we are heading, economically, we are bound to head to some form of doom and gloom unless the right policies are being implemented. So, and David Ricardo's work is like most of the work at the time, was very practical with immediate policy implications. And of course, the economists of that time were a lot more important as regards policy than economists. Today, many are economists, they just do number crunching and they're consulted. But politicians don't often refer to economists in terms of what they are doing. But at the time, that policy and the contribution to policy making was a lot more important. That's why it was called political economy. Okay. Nowadays you get subjects that in economics, courses in economics that are called political economy, and usually they are distinguished from pure theory. Supposedly there are some people who do pure economic theory and their relevance for policy isn't immediately obvious. But then there's this thing called political economy with a focus on, we got to, what are the implications for politics in terms of economic theory. And so we're going to be looking at David Ricardo from the perspective of policy making. And the big question at the time in England, he was, was born in London, the son of a stockbroker. He himself became a stockbroker, became famously rich. Within a short period, by the age of 40, he retired and dedicated himself to the study of economics. That is after he picked up a copy of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. He dedicated himself to his economic thinking. And at the time, the big debate was around the Corn Laws. Okay, that's the period around about 1812, 1815. And his contribution was in the context of the Corn Laws, because, that period, 1812, 1815, that is the end, that's after the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And anybody know anything about the Napoleonic Wars? I don't know so much myself, but obviously it was Napoleon who tried to conquer. I mean, he went as far. Napoleon Bonaparte, he made himself Emperor of France. That's how, isn't that crazy? They've got the French Revolution in 1784. They killed their king only to make somebody else an emperor. That was Napoleon. Napoleon just starting as a general, army general in the French army, but he went as far east as where? His army went Russia. Thank you very much. As far east as Moscow, had to turn back. eventually defeated by the Russians and also defeated by Waterloo, in Waterloo by some famous English general. But the point for us is that there was war between France and Britain. And of course, England, let's just refer to England or Britain, but England, the Brits didn't want to import any corn from the enemy, which was France, because France had a much bigger agricultural sector than England, and they relied heavily on import of French corn into England. And that's the period leading up to the war, leading up to around about 1800. And so at the time of the war with the French, and at the time of the power of Napoleon, they had instituted through the parliament, they had instituted laws that prohibited the importation of corn from England. Sorry, from France. It's late at night, isn't it? And so those laws were still in place in 1815 after the war came to an end. And now the debate was, well, whether those laws against the imports of corn from France and other places should be abolished or whether they should carry on. Now, of course, who benefited from those laws? If you've got a prohibition on imports, who's going to benefit from that prohibition? Which sector is going to benefit from the prohibition against agricultural imports from France?
The agricultural sector.
Thank you. And in particular, you know, the agriculture. Say, Chesri?
The landlord's ability. I mean, the tenant farmers as well, but the active class and the powerful class.
There you go. There you go. The landlords, and you know, you've got in English politics, you've got two house system. You've got a house. You've got the House of Commons, and you've got the House of Lords. And the House of Lords certainly was more important, and certainly the House of Lords passed the bill making sure that there's a prohibition on the imports of corn from France, because the Lords were the land-owning class. Remember the three-class society already portrayed by the physiocrats, and now that class, the House of Lords, the landlords, didn't want those laws to be abolished because it was good, man. It was good. Because if you've got a prohibition on imports on corn, what is going to happen to the price of corn? If there's a prohibition on the importation of corn, what's going to happen to the price of corn?
It will increase.
They will increase. Okay, so here you got the political situation. The price of corn is increasing. And we gotta, what we also see is, okay. The price of corn is increasing. Another phenomenon at the same time is that rent being paid to the landlords was also increasing. And well, the argument was often made that, well, rent is increasing. Let's just park that for a moment. If we go to a Adam Smith theory of price, theory of value, he says the price of a commodity, the price of a good the real value, the natural price, is, if you like, the sum of the input costs, the sum of production costs, and therefore, if rent is high, that then means that the price of the thing will be high. We'll get back to that in a moment. It's a question of causation. But what was required at the time is an argument that would say that, well, there's got to be an argument that would help us argue against the import prohibitions. And David Ricardo brought in a twofold argument. He brought in the argument of the theory of comparative advantage, and he brought in the argument of his theory of rent. And that's what we're going to be looking at now, the theory of rent, because that was the overarching. He was making an argument saying that we got to do something urgently against this, because it's going to ruin not only the agricultural sector in England, but if we don't do something against that prohibition against corn imports, it's going to ruin the whole economy. It's going to have ramifications throughout the economy. It's going to lead us to a stationary state. It's going to lead to, and that of course was of great interest to Karl Marx. It will lead to a falling rate of profits. And of course, a falling rate of profits would make us think, you know, the capitalist class. We looked at Adam Smith, and we saw he continued the division of the economy into the different classes, including the capitalist class. And he emphasized how important the capitalist class is. I'm not going to go through that now, other than to say that the capitalist class will be the only class that would be expected to invest into further economic growth, because their profits will allow investment into capital equipment, which allows for increased division of labor, which starts our circle of growing the economy. Now, not only Adam Smith, but also David Ricardo reserved a very important place for the capitalist class in economic development. And what you wanted to avoid is the falling rate of profit, because that will eventually lead to stagnation. He developed his argument in terms of the theory of rent. And so that is the model that we have to look at this point in time. The theory of rent, we will be looking at. Does it sound complicated, the theory of rent? It sounds complicated. It is complicated because it also introduces that so important term into economic analysis, that term called the margin. Except when he talked about the margin, he talked about the external margin. Okay, and once we're done with this, we will have developed an understanding of the external margin and how it differs from the internal margin. I mean, think of the following. You know, let's say you are a farmer and you've got different pieces of land, and you're only cultivating one piece of land, and you're not cultivating other pieces of land, just one piece of land, but you're cultivating it more intensely. How can you cultivate it more intensely? If you've got a parcel of land, you want to cultivate it more intensely. What could you do to cultivate it more intensely? Well, first, let's ask the question, why do you want to cultivate it more intensely? Roy, who do I see? No. Why do you want to cultivate a piece of land more intensely?
To increase output.
to increase output, exactly. And so to increase output, a given piece of land, you're not using more land. You've got a given piece of land. You want to increase output. What can you do to increase output? None of you are farmers, are you?
You can invest in capital accumulation for the sake of production in the land.
Okay, you can invest in capital equipment. You may get more shovels, more people. Jesri, you wanted to say something?
Fertilizer crop rotation was quite important in the English agricultural revolution. The Green Revolution was obviously based on synthetic fertilizers. Yeah.
There you go, fertilizers. It's okay, that's what you would do. You put in more fertilizers to make it grow more lushly, more bigger. There's a limit to how much you can increase output. Even if you add more and more fertilizer, at some point it's going to make no difference. Even if you add more capital equipment, at some point it makes no difference. But initially it will lead to a growth in output. That is referred to as the internal margin. Okay, that a given piece of land you're cultivating more intensely, that is now working on the internal margin. The external margin is when you're not cultivating more intensely a piece of land, but you go to another piece of land and you start growing your crop on another piece of land. Okay, so if you are a farmer, or you've got a farm and you've got different quality of land, which land are you going to cultivate first?
The most fertile land.
The most fertile lands. And then you move to the next most fertile lands. And so as your market expands, as you can sell greater output, you go from the most fertile lands to the least fertile lands. But now let us say that your farm has got 1 degree of fertility, or let's say you are a capitalist, let's say, who is a farmer, and you are renting land, and you're renting land from the landlord. So which parcel of land do you want to rent from the landlord? You want to rent the most fertile lands. And if that most fertile land is already taken, you rent the next fertile land. And if that's already taken, you take the next fertile land. You get the drift? Alternatively, if the most fertile land is already taken, you go to the landlord and you say, I want to rent land from you. I want to cultivate your land. And what I want your most fertile land. And the landlord tells you, well, the most fertile land has already been rented out. What are you going to tell him? You got 2 options. You say, okay, I'll take the next fertile unit of land or parcel of land, or you can do what else?
Pay more.
Pay more. You tell him, I'm going to pay you more. So let's look at what that means. And that's now where we become economic. We are now going to have a blackboard would be ideal, but we're going to have a system of axes. Can you see? And on the vertical axis, we've got output per parcel of land. And on the horizontal axis, we have parcels of land. And what we're doing, we are representing the different parcels of land on that system of axes. And the most fertile piece of land we call A, and it's producing an output equal to A. And we may not know much else, but we know that the next parcel of land will be the next fertile parcel of land. By definition, we say it's less fertile, so it's producing a lower output. And we know, that's what Ricardo would tell us, is that, well, the capitalist, well, first, the most fertile piece of land will be used. And then if more output has to be produced, somebody will have to rent parcel of land B. And then, of course, if more land has to be brought under cultivation, then parcel C and parcel D will have to be brought under cultivation. They're less fertile, but they're still producing output. Don't get me wrong. What's important is not, we're not saying that C and D doesn't produce much output. It can produce plenty of output. It's just producing less than A or B. And so cultivation on the external margin means that we're bringing less fertile land under cultivation. Okay. But as somebody said, if at the moment the landlord is renting out only land A, and let us assume, you know, somebody has been willing, somebody is cultivating that land for him. Let's assume that the rent isn't an issue at the moment, but somebody else comes along and he says that he is willing to pay a higher price. He's willing to pay a higher price for it. So let's look at capitalists or a farmer who's got an option. He can either cultivate land B or offer a higher price or higher rent for parcel A. On what would be the rent that he's willing to offer for parcel A?
The difference between the maximal surplus value of land A and B.
That's it. Okay, no big shakes. It's the difference between the output produced in land A compared to the output produced on land B, parcel B. And the difference is this shaded area. Okay. That's the maximum that the farmer is willing to pay to cultivate land A. The maximum. Hopefully, he could get the land for less than paying that shaded area in terms of rent. But he's not willing to pay more than that because rather than cultivating land A, getting output A, but paying the amount of the shaded area as rent, rather than doing that, what would he rather do than paying more than that rent? he'd rather cultivate land B, which at this point, by assumption, okay, that's again one of our simplifying assumptions, by assumption, no rent is paid for land A, because in a sense we'd be saying it's marginal land, you know, given the prices and the rent that's being paid for things, it's marginal land. It's not worthwhile to pay any rent for it, but this changes if another farmer comes along and says he wants to cultivate land, and he can either cultivate land C, or, but we know C is producing a lower output than A and even a lower output than B. That farmer can either cultivate land C or do what?
He can offer to pay rent in relation to the differences between the surplus value of land B and A.
That's right. Again, he would go and offer rent for land for land B, and the rent that he's willing to pay is given by the difference in the output produced. Can you see that there? The difference in output produced on parcel B compared to parcel C. In other words, he'd be willing to pay this amount of rent. A different color would be good. I don't know if I've got anything that works. Okay, he'd be willing to pay the green shaded area equivalent of rent for parcel B. But he could also go and rent parcel A, right? And what would he pay? What rent would he willing? What is the maximum rent he would be willing to pay for parcel A, to cultivate parcel A, rather than cultivate parcel C? And again, the answer is the difference. The difference between the output produced by parcel A compared to parcel C. In other words, he could go to the landlords and now offer the shaded area, the green shaded area for land A. And you can see what has happened to rent that is being paid. What has happened to rent that is being paid to the landlords as more and more land is brought under cultivation?
It increases.
It increases. Now, that's got important implications for the Corn Law debate, because as you stop imports from France and other countries, imports of corn, so you got to produce locally in order to feed the population. And as you got to produce more corn locally, so you got to bring more land under cultivation. But as you bring additional land under cultivation, the land that you bring under cultivation will be more and more expensive to operate because it's further and further away, possibly. But for our analysis, we would rather be saying it is less fertile than the land that's already under cultivation, because you will always start with the most fertile lands, and from the most fertile move to the less fertile land. But as we move and cultivate less and less fertile land, rent will be higher and higher. That's not a big deal idea, okay? I mean, which is okay, let's say you want to open a shop. And what is an expensive shopping center? Give me a name, you know, you might know better than I.
Melrose Arch.
Melrose Arch, okay. Okay. The rent there is higher than what other shopping center?
Fourways Mall.
It's higher. The rent there is much higher than in Fourways Mall. Make no mistake, you're paying a lot of money at Fourways Mall. You know, for these shopping centers, I know you pay something like 1,000 Rand per square meter. So if you've got a little Pondoki of 10 square meter, that is, sorry, no, you're paying 10,000 Rand per square meter. But at Melrose Arch, you probably pay 50,000 Rand per square meter because it's more valuable, it's more productive in terms of, you know, the products that you're selling there, the people who are spending money there, they don't care about the money that they're paying. If you like, the rent that you're paying, if you've got a shop in Braamfontein, you're not paying 10,000 Rand per square meter, you're paying 10,000 Rand for 100 square meters. So where your location, depending on your location, it is productive of clients. It is productive of revenue. And so where the revenue stream is the highest, that's why shopping centers are more expensive, because there's thousands and thousands of people that pass every day that bringing people into your shop. That's why you're paying a high rent. On the other hand, if you've got a shop that is on let's say Fox Street in Johannesburg, there's no traffic of people there, and so the rent that you can charge will be a lot less. That is basically the idea that is contained in this little analysis of David Ricardo. And as more land, as in this example, D is brought under cultivation, but as D is brought under cultivation, rent is now the green shaded area. And you can see rent, the amount of rent that is being paid on A, B, and C is determined by the last unit under cultivation. So if we bring unit E under cultivation, okay, then the rent being paid for A, B, C, and D is determined by the product fertility of E. Which is given by the green shaded area. So if you want to summarize that, you'd be saying that rent is determined by which unit? The amount of rent paid to landlords for all the other pieces of land, all the other parcels of land, is determined by the marginal unit, by the last unit that's being brought under cultivation. Okay, and so the notion of the margin is very important, except here we're looking at the external margin, not cultivating more land more intensively. My simplifying assumption in this model, or rather, let's say Ricardo's simplifying assumption, is that all pieces of land employ the same amount of labor and capital, the same amount of fertilizer, if you like, the same amount of shovels. And then, so the intensity of cultivation, the internal margin is the same, is assumed to be constant, but external units of land are being brought into cultivation, and those determine the rent that is being paid. What is happening to rent? It's increasing. Now we've got to bring in our three classes of Sorry for my absence. So now we can generalize that, and we've got a downward. The green one doesn't work so nice. You've got a system of axes measuring output on this axis, output per unit of land, the quantity of land under cultivation on this axis, and we can see it's declining. Okay, that's just representing, if you like, the productivity of the different pieces of land in a country. If we have only A units of land under cultivation, can you see that clear enough? If we have only A, okay, thank you very much, then output of the marginal unit under cultivation is A. And if we bring B under cultivation, then output of the marginal unit is B. And we say rent is determined by the marginal unit. So rent, if we have B units under cultivation, then rent is determined by the output produced by land A and would be represented by the green shaded area. All good? That's what goes to the landlords. That is rent paid to the landlords. And now we're moving to David Ricardo's theory of income distribution. And again, like the physiocrats, like Adam Smith, like we do in classical economics, like Karl Marx does, we divide society into three classes. And so here we got the landlords, the landowning class, the capitalists, and the working class. And we already know what the landlords are earning. They're earning, and we know how much. They're earning rent, and the rent is determined by the marginal unit of land. And then we've got to say something about the income of the capitalists and the income of the workers, those who work for the farmers, for the capitalists. And you've come across earlier, and certainly when we did Malthus, we talked about the wages fund, that it was assumed, one of the simplifying assumptions, that people of the working class will always earn an income equivalent to subsistence level. And that subsistence level was expressed in terms of the wages fund. Let me write that down for you. The wages fund. And the wages fund is really constant because it's given by subsistence. And I'm calling this here subsistence. That's the subsistence amount of corn required by labor that works on land A, that works on land B. It's the same for everybody, whether the worker is on land A or land B or land C. Subsistence requirements are the same, okay, by definition, if you like, given that we're all the same human beings. And so the amount that will be paid as wages, in particular wages fund, is given by this. If land A is brought on and land B is under cultivation, the wages fund is equal to the red shaded area. And then given this setup, what is the amount of profits that are being earned by the capitalist farmer?
Isn't it the surplus value minus wages and minus the rent?
Thank you very much. It's really that. It is really the total revenue earned minus rent, minus wages that are being paid. And so it is this white area, the blank area. The blank area are the profits earned, signified by pi. Okay, so we've got to look at this. We've got a distribution of income. Okay, and for classical economics, the theory of distribution was always very important. We saw that already with the physiocrats. We saw it in Adam Smith, and now we see it, and it will become even more important in the work of Ricardo. We see it here. Marx certainly latches onto that because for him the theory of income distribution is crucial. We will obviously, as we move along in this course on the history of economic thought, we will look at the theory of income distribution as we understand it also in neoclassical marginalist analysis. Well, what is our modern theory of income distribution in neoclassical economics? You don't know.
Income is divided. Isn't it that income is divided amongst laborers as well as the capitalist class?
Everybody gets an income, labor, and capital, but what determines?
Well, exactly compensates people for labor productivity.
Productivity, thank you very much. It is all about our theory of income distribution is the marginal productivity theory of income distribution, that effectively any factor of production, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, is being rewarded as to its productivity. And so we don't even, and that applies to workers, that applies to managers, about middle management. It applies to the people who put up the capital. It's really looking at the factor productivity. It's looking at the productivity. We'll get back to that later, but that's an important difference. Now, Ricardo used this model to make his statement about the stationary state. And he says that what happens if we keep in place the Corn Laws? As we keep in place the Corn Laws and the population is growing, so more and more land has to be brought under cultivation in England. And so as we move from over time, we will have to bring land parcel C under cultivation. But C's fertility, can you see that there? Productivity, if you like, but C will produce an output only equal to C. And what happens because of that, and we've already said that rent is determined, rent is set by the marginal unit of land. But now the marginal unit of land is no longer B, but the marginal unit of land is unit C. And therefore, rent will now be the increased area shaded in green. Wages fund is now the increased area shaded in red. And what does it look like has happened to profits? Profits is now given here. Profit is now pi, that blank area. We certainly know that rent has increased. Are you in agreement? The wages fund has increased. We're not quite sure what has happened to capital, okay? Sorry, to profits. But if we carry on with this example and we bring land okay, we bring land D under cultivation. We can see once we've got land D under cultivation, the wages fund increases. It's the red shaded area. Rent is determined by the marginal unit of land, which is now D. Can you see how rent has increased? And look what's happening to profit. Just visually, what is happening to profits? You're still not happy. I can take the example further.
It tends towards zero.
Thank you very much. It tends towards zero. As we bring E under cultivation, profit becomes less, rent increases, but profits tend towards zero. That is the famous falling rate of profit, which we will encounter again in the work of Karl Marx. The idea of a falling rate of profit, crucial to Marx. It's here in the work of David Ricardo, based on the analysis of his theory of rent. His theory, it's called the theory of rent. You could as well call it the theory of profit if you like it. But the point is, if this continues, then eventually, let us say that that will be attained. If we increase, if we bring land F under cultivation, at F, the productivity of the land, the amount of output produced by that last unit of land, is equal to what is required by the workers for subsistence. In other words, it doesn't produce anything beyond subsistence for the workers. It doesn't give a profit. Profit earned by that last capitalist will be zero. But because that marginal piece of land determines the rent, remember rent said, sorry, the marginal unit of land determines rent. Therefore, that last unit of rent, or unit of land, also determines profits. Profits will be zero because everything above the subsistence, the wages fund, will now go to, it will now go to rent. And you can see, well, what is the biggest area? It's glaring in your eyes. Rent is green, it's the biggest area, and profits have been squeezed out entirely. And so what Ricardo is saying, well, what Ricardo would refer to that situation, at that point F, at that point F, sorry, I can't see at the moment. At that point F, we have attained the stationary state, beyond which I mean, profits, I mean, it's called the stationary state, and it's seen to affect the entire economy. One, because the agricultural sector is an important part, was the most important part at the time, doesn't apply to us today, but also assuming freedom of movement of capital. And the most important, it may well be that the most important sector may determine the rate of returns, if you like, but certainly it's going to have economy-wide implications. And what we have then is a stationary state. We call it stationary because the capitalist, as in Adam Smith, where the capitalist is doing the investment. So here too, we've got a capitalist investing into the agricultural sector, but beyond the profits earned are diminishing. There's a falling rate of profit, and eventually there are no profits made whatsoever, and therefore there will be no further investment into the agricultural sector. If there's no further investment into the agricultural sector, what happens to agricultural output?
It
It
goes
remains
down.
constant. Thank you, Liesl, and whoever else. It remains constant. You cannot support a growing population. That's another reason why it's called the stationary state. Population growth, according, even with the idea of Malthus thrown in there, will come to an end, and we've got economic recession, and so it's the stationary state, and that's what Foucault refers to as the what did I call it? The finitude that's implied here. It's moving towards that stationary state. It will be an equilibrium, if you like, because it's certainly an equilibrium, because there's no incentive for farmers and capitalists to make any more investment. And so now he's using that to argue against the Corn Laws. He's saying that we don't want to find ourselves in this position F, but we're heading to that position if we rely only on local English corn output, what they had experienced at the time. Oops, that one doesn't work. I used the red one. There was this enormous increase in rent that was being paid to the landlords. And of course, the landlords were happy about it. Ricardo uses this argument against the landlords, saying that, well, you can see what it does. It certainly makes the landlords rich, and the landlords, of course, they're going to be in favor of maintaining the Corn Law, but the economy as a whole, anybody who's got the common interest at heart would want to have that Corn Law abolished. What they would also have realized is that prices were extremely high, corn prices were increasing. But what the novel point made by Ricardo here, Ricardo was saying price is high, okay, given the analysis of Adam Smith. Adam Smith would say the price is high because the rent is high, because labor expenses are high, because input costs are high, because rent is high. So rent is feeding into high prices. But Ricardo said the opposite. He said, okay, so we got, if you like, we got this causation from high rent to high price. But Ricardo said that because the price is high, the price of corn, because that price of corn is high, it makes it it provides an incentive to bring less and less fertile, less and less productive parcels of land under cultivation. And as more and more land is brought under cultivation, so what happens to rent? Rent increases. And so he says that don't blame the high rent. If you want to deal with the economic problems, if you want to avoid a stationary state, don't go to rent and push the rent down and introduce legislation that has to do with rent. No, that's just looking at the symptom rather than the cause. The cause are the high prices, and the high prices exist because there's no import. There's no import from France and elsewhere because of the Corn Laws. And accordingly, that then was his argument, which won the day, really, which won the day for the abolition of the Corn Laws eventually. Now, interesting here is that it's not even based on an argument of liberty at this point, okay? Because certainly Adam Smith and others would have made an argument saying that no, they, people that, or international trade theory would be saying that there should be free international trade, and it will, it's got those implications for wealth and avoiding the stationary state, if you like. But he made the argument primarily or initially only on the theory of rent, and later he introduced the theory of comparative advantage. Now, with that theory of comparative advantage, making the argument for international trade as a whole, not just for free trade for corn and being beneficial for England to avoid the stationary state, but then also making an argument that international trade is beneficial for the economy anyway, and not only for England, but for all economies. So what we will need to do, look at the theory of comparative advantage. I want to stop at this point because certainly all the economic, most of you know the theory of comparative advantage. What I will do for those who are not, I'll talk about that in a moment. So we've done here the theory of comparative advantage, the theory of rent of David Ricardo. You got any questions on that theory of rent, on that model, on what we've done here? Can you see the Ricardian vice? A few simplifying assumptions, a little model. We'll do the same when we look at comparative advantage. And bingo, you've got an argument with massive political economy implications used as a weapon against the Corn Law lobby. And of course, with this, David Ricardo shot to great prominence in England. And I might say he's certainly, he's probably, certainly when we get to comparative advantage, but you can already see the importance of David Ricardo in the history of economic thought. He's giving us the Ricardian vice, meaning he's giving us model building. Can you see? We haven't come across models like that, as sophisticated as that quite yet. What model have we come across? We've come across the circular flow of the physiocrats. We've come across the table of the physiocrats. I'll put it like a bit of a model when it comes to Adam Smith, but certainly, he wasn't building models of that type. But here we've got taking this model building to a new level, to the level of Ricardian vice, we've got a system of axes, if you like. And what else do we have from Ricardo? We've got the introduction of the notion of the margin. We will use it, we'll use it again, but later when we do marginalist analysis, we're going to come across, well, he's certainly working on this idea of free trade, certainly when you get to comparative advantage. He's important but also important for Marxist economists. We've got the falling rate of profit. We've got the three-class analysis. We've got the simplifying assumptions of constant capital intensity when he's got the assumption of labor and capital ratio being kept the same. What we haven't looked at yet is the labor theory of value. Did he have a labor theory of value? And so what we're going to do, because it's getting towards, it's getting towards 8 o'clock. What we're going to do next week, the first half hour, I'm going to set aside for Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, okay? Which helps us explain which will give us the argument for free international trade. I will do that for the benefit of those who are not feeling comfortable with that. Remember, I said that we've got students from economics and from the social sciences. I'm gonna address comparative advantage in the first half hour next week. So I don't expect the economics students to be part of that. I certainly expect the social sciences students to be part of that lecture. Remember that some of that material will be, I will have a test on the theory of comparative advantage, another work that we're going to be doing for the social sciences students. So that's where we are with David Ricardo. Then after we've done the theory of comparative advantage in the first half hour next week, then we're going to be carrying on. We're going to conclude David Ricardo. We're just briefly going to look at the labor theory of value, wrapping up another few points regarding David Ricardo. Then we look at what came afterwards in classical economics. And then the lecture after that will commence with, we might already commence with that. The lecture after that will then be on Karl Marx and other socialists before Karl Marx. So any questions from your side on the material that we've done up to now, or any other questions relating to today's lecture or any previous lectures?
Hi, Michael. I don't have a question on the content. I just have a question about the economics test for the social science students, the date.
Okay. For the test, as it will be on Saturday or this coming Saturday?
No, you mentioned, and it's also in the outline, that there's going to be an economics test for the social science students.
Okay, so thank you very much. So what I will be doing, like I will be doing next week, and I'm going to give you more information next week. Next week from 5 to 5:30, I'll do work specifically for the social sciences student. We're going to do comparative advantage. We're going to be doing marginalist analysis. I've got various topics. The test will be towards the end. Will be towards the end of this block. And as it is best, the weighting of it will as given in the announcement, an early announcement, and what I've put on Sakai. So I'm gonna fill in with more details. Okay. What I will do next week when we look at the theory of comparative advantage, you'll see at what details I'll be looking at it, and that will give you an idea of how well you have to know, what you will have to know about international trade, about the theory of comparative advantage. But I'll give you more details as to when and the content over the next few weeks. Thanks for asking the question, Eden.
Thank you.
Yes, there's a question from Jacques.
Evening, Michael. I would just like to know, for who is the test on Saturday for the economic students now?
That's for everybody, okay? The test on Saturday is for all students. It is okay, so I expect to get about 27 submissions from all the students. It covers everything we've done from the first lecture up to the lecture dealing with the physiocrats. So it covers everything up to physiocracy. It doesn't include the work on Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and what's going to follow. It is, you know, I'll post the question at 10 o'clock on Sakai on Saturday. You've got time to answer until 10 o'clock on Sunday, the next day. I'll give you an additional few days to provide me with your bibliography or your references. I will only start marking it once I've got the references, but I only want you 24 hours to deal with the work, and then make sure that you give me all your references by the time I do the reading of your essay. So I'm going to have 2 submissions from you. I'm going to have the body text, and I'm going to have your list of references. In your body text, you can already have references. Just okay, you got to know where you're taking it from, but you may not have typed it out. So you can just put in the author's name and the article, the year, and then your bibliography that comes in on Friday will give me the details of that reference. Roy had a question.
Yes, I just wanted to know about the in-text referencing, but you've just answered the question.
Okay. Then what else about? So the test is for everybody. I said it covers everything you've done up to now. When I say everything we've done up to now, it will also include not only my lectures, but it will also include the videos that you've done and the topics in the videos. Okay, be that Aristotle and the 4 courses, be it the submissions on Locke and Hobbes, everything, just everything that's there. And well, you know, of course, you've got the readings which I've posted. You've got various general texts on the history of economic thought. But as far as what you're allowed to consult, you know, you're allowed to consult any work, okay? Important, I want you to do your own work. Do not share information. Do not exchange notes. You don't want to cheat. Why on earth would you want to cheat, okay? I mean, you want to do the best you can individually. Don't do cut and pastes. Don't do cut and pastes, okay? Use your own words. Turn it in. I don't know how it works, but I suppose it works. There's a question from Liesl and then Jacques.
I just wanted to know, if we do use information from the videos, how would we cite them?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I don't know how you're going to cite them. You'll you'll give me the answer, okay? I'm not too concerned about the technical correctness of your citations, of your referencing. Just make sure that I know exactly, you give the author's name. If you got a presentation, then it's Vosloo 2020, and you give me, you do it accessed on such a date, and you give them the link. I think, something like that. Or the same of your colleagues. At least I know they will all be 2020. And if I see somewhere, I see a reference, Peluane 2020, and it's you can use other YouTubes, really. I mean, in some of the essays that were returned to me, there've been references to YouTubes. That's great. Or other internet access, use that. I mean, the reality is we're using that all the time. The reality is that it plays an important role in our education. The problem, it's got problems. Some of the information is just very dicey and bad. That's part of the academic exercise, that you've got to know what is good and what is not good. And you've got to pick out mistakes and see where there are mistakes. When you watch a video and it's wrong, and then I may pick up that it's wrong, but not necessarily. And the academic enterprise is such that what counts is that there's so much nonsense that's going around anyways. So what you got to do is you got to show that you can. That's why I emphasize this. Put together a coherent argument. Let there be mistakes. You got mistakes. I'm not going to punish you for those mistakes. Okay? If you're working on some video that's plainly wrong, or at least I think it's wrong, I'm going to take that into consideration, because I know you haven't had time to study the Aristotle's 4 courses in great detail, but at least, you've got my lectures as a basis point, but I'm going to make allowance that you're not consulting the most sophisticated, if there's something that's pretty difficult, you only got 24 hours. You're not giving me an academic article that you want to be I mean, that would be wonderful if I could get it. So I'm going to read it in that context. Okay, Liesl, does that answer your question? I'm a lot more than just answering that.
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Jacques?
Lastly, so I would just like to know the format of the test. Will we be, maybe you didn't really tell us, or it's somewhere. I just would like to make sure, would it be, it's essay format, but would it be, for example, here's 4 questions, pick 3 and write 3 essays on that?
It will be something like that, but I think as it stands at the moment, I will probably want more in-depth work. And so rather than, I mean, if you've looked at past exam papers, you would have seen usually it's 4 questions or more. No, 8 questions, answer 4. And for a test, it might have been 3 questions to be answered. What I think as it stands at the moment, I'll give you a choice of 3 and you answer 2.
Perfect.
But
Thank you very much.
I may just change my mind in the last minute. But at the moment, that's how it stands.
100%. Thank you, sir.
Okay. And then, of course, during the tests, I'm available to consult with you. Consult, I mean, I'm not going to consult with you on the subject matter, but I mean, on the content and giving you answers. But if there's things that are not clear, then of course we'll use this famous WhatsApp. But I want it to be shared on the group. So I don't want private questions from students. I want all questions during the test to go through the group's WhatsApp, the History of Economic Thought WhatsApp group. Okay. I'll speak to you on Saturday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
bye.
Night. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.